This is Khatt Chronicles, design stories from the Arab world. My name is Yasmine Taan, and I have with me today Nora Zeid. Nora Zeid is an award-winning Egyptian illustrator based in Dubai. She is an amazing visual storyteller. Her stories revolve around heritage spaces and how they affect people's relationships with them. Nora held her first solo exhibition with the title Cairo Illustrated, Stories from Heliopolis at Tashkil in Dubai in 2021. She had another show in 2022 on Cairo Illustrated in Cairo. Her comics are published in Sharjah Art Foundation Anthology in 2020. She worked with Google, Adidas, Diwan Publishing, Vice Arabia, and Kerning Cultures. Hi, Nora.
Hi, Yasmine. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? So Nora is not in Cairo. She is in Dubai, and I am in Beirut. And I'm so happy to see Nora today. So let's start with the first question. So when and why you decided to become an illustrator?
That's a good question. I decided to become, or at least to get involved, to study design when I was in university, and I realized that although I'd excelled at the scientific subjects, I enjoyed drawing more than anything else. And of course, back then I was under the misconception that design and art are the same thing. So I went into graphic design thinking it's art. Yes, so I studied visual communication at the American University of Sharjah, and that was my in. And then as I studied design, I just fell in love with illustration as a form of visual storytelling and visual communication.
So I'm curious, who taught at that time? Who taught the illustration class at AUC?
I was actually at AUS, so American University of Sharjah, and the person teaching was Philip Shield. He was my illustration professor at the time. I think I had other professors, but the one I took the most courses with was Philip Shield. He still teaches there now. I think he's head of foundation.
And so how did your study somehow inform your career? I mean, going back to thinking about your education and your, tutors at that time and, how you're producing your illustrations today.
It informed my career quite a lot because having a graphic design background ended up being super, super, super helpful. I did work as a graphic designer for 3 years before I went full-time, freelancing full-time as an illustrator. Just having learned at university and then subsequently at my job how to visually communicate complex ideas, how to lay out a page properly, and then whatever you design, whether it's a brand, visual language, a brochure, a book, whatever it is, how to package that in a way that whatever designer is going to pick up the work after you can read that file and understand it. All of these skills ended up very much informing my practice as an illustrator. And I enjoy working with graphic designers. So that's something that I came out with after university as well. And of course, the process that we learned, the design process that we learned in university very much applies to illustration.
So if you had to think about, a TV show or a book or a website or an exhibition or a person that inspired your work, who would that be?
Who inspired my work? One of the illustrators she's still working. Her work's gorgeous. Julep Hasbar, I thought her work was beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
So when I was in university, I was obsessed with her work, and I still am, just how intricate her illustrations are. And there was also Ahmed Thabit. He worked at Matter. He's also an illustrator and a graphic designer. And one of his designs that really, really inspired me when I was younger was in 2017 when they did the illustration with Matter Studio. They did the illustrations for a bottle of water called Flo. The illustrations were very beautiful and they were all over Cairo on billboards. And when I went on vacation in the summer and I saw them, I thought to myself, okay, so you can do illustration for a living. Because everybody always told me you can't. And seeing a well-executed, beautiful illustration on such a large scale was very, very inspiring for me. It made me feel like, okay, I can do this. If someone else is doing it, so I can definitely do this.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned this. This was, my next question, where I wanted to talk to you about how you think about your profession as a creative profession, but at the same time, you live from your creativity, and how do you, and looking into the range of clients that you've worked with, their corporate I mean, most of them. But then at the same time, your work is really, I feel that I see your work. It's very sensitive. It has an interesting feel that is, I might say, personal come in. So how do you somehow manage to combine creativity and being an illustrator as a career, working on, if I may say, commercial projects?
It's actually quite challenging to balance sometimes, but it started off for me as well. Like when we were students, me and my colleagues, we'd always think that, okay, the word commercial was always viewed in a negative light. If it's commercial, it's not necessarily good. It's bad. It's for profit. And I kind of started to look at it as something that's neutral. Someone is hiring me or someone is collaborating with me and compensating me for this illustration, which means that they assign it the value that it has, which is not like necessarily a positive or a negative thing. It's just a thing. So it's just not having a negative outlook on that. And then I created work. I mean, there's my visual arts practice, my Cairo Illustrated pieces and my urban illustrations and anything related to culture and built heritage. This is my visual arts practice. I will not compromise on that and on the message that I'm trying to convey for financial gain, because this is my baby, if that makes sense. The rest is more like I'm excited for people to come to me with their problems and for me to solve them visually. And so I find that very exciting. So, for example, I worked with SYP on a series of illustrations for the Emirati Pavilion at COP28. And it was a very positive experience because we were a group of designers and creative thinkers who had a problem to solve. We needed to convey pretty complex information visually. And so I was there and illustrating some of these ideas and some of these graphs for them so that when people walked through the pavilion, they could understand what they're looking at. And so this problem-solving process is very, very, very satisfying. So maybe it's a little bit different than my visual arts practice, but I enjoy the process for the problem-solving aspect, working with a team and having a tight deadline. I appreciate the challenge of it.
I want to go back to the Cairo Illustrated project. I want you to tell us a bit about it. I mean, I know you've been talking about it for a while, but tell us more. I mean, I want you to take us through the research that you have done for this project, and I don't know, I mean, this idea of drawing memory, drawing a place that you long for, this idea of what also the role of illustrators in reviving heritage. Not just that, I mean, this part also that I see in your illustrations that is very much informative about, scientifically informative about the different the architecture details, for example, in Cairo, and I'm sure you will have a lot more to say about that.
So Cairo Illustrated initially started as a way for me to reconnect with Cairo. I had gotten into the critical practice program with Tashkil, which is a program that supports emerging artists, provides them with the resources to, after a few months, put together a solo exhibition. I had my mentors, Hana Laini from Mobius and Ghania Sarakbi. So it started there. I started doing research about Cairo. I was frustrated by the narrative around my hometown. I had some people when I talked to them and I'd say I'm frustrated by something in Cairo, they would tell me, "Oh, you're not patriotic. How dare you speak poorly of your country?" And then on the flip side, I had people tell me, "Oh, why do you even go back to Cairo? It's awful." And I would tell them, "No, I love Cairo. It's my hometown, with all of its challenges, I will always love it." And they would not get that. And so I just wanted to understand instead of cast judgment, to understand the city and to understand the space. So I did a lot of reading, and then at the same time, there was ongoing events in Cairo where there's a lot of infrastructural projects happening, livelihood bridges being built, neighborhoods being completely altered, green spaces being removed, roads being widened, homes being demolished to make room for more roads. And so all of these projects were happening in Egypt and in Cairo specifically, and seeing how it was changing the spaces that we grew up seeing, and not necessarily always for the better, was very frustrating. So there was also this sense of, aside from a desire to reconnect, there was a sense of urgency that, oh my God, someone has to document this quickly. Someone has to show people how valuable it can be. They're not just some old buildings. You know what I mean? And so that was what started it. And then in terms of like the importance of illustration, when it comes to depicting heritage, I think that representation of our built heritage and pop culture is very important. It's crucial because a lot of the spaces, heritage spaces around the world that we're familiar with because of movies, because of songs, because of comics that we've read, let's say about New York or about Paris. And so we think these places are valuable because we've read them in our stories and we've heard the stories from these places, from the people that live in these places. So I was imagining, Tayyib, what if we had more stories like that from our cities, from Beirut, from Cairo, from Baghdad? And then when people think of these cities, they don't think of whatever negative depiction might be present in the media. They think of these stories. And then they might think that certain spaces are worth visiting and understanding and preserving. And so that was the inspiration behind Cairo Illustrated.
Yeah, amazing. I really like this idea of the illustrator changing the urban narrative, like you were just talking about it. I mean, this it's a bit, it sounds a bit empowering to the illustrator that can change the story about a city. I like it. And when I look at the illustrations that you've produced about Cairo, I feel that there's an element of voyeurism. And so this is me, the viewer, looking into, you're providing us with a scene to look into the hidden parts of the city, the parts that the city or most of the people in the city do not want to show, or maybe the government. But you're taking us through these small places that we feel that they're supposed to be secretive or hidden, and I think this is really interesting in your illustrations. Looking into the vernacular, the popular, again, as you said, the parts that are maybe seen negative by some people. I like that. What about the reason for using just black? I mean, I like that. I think, with all the details that you have, it helps, but I want you to tell us more about this.
Oh yeah, there's a very specific reason actually. So Cairo's can be very overwhelming. There is so much going on. People are coming and going, and cars are beeping, and 100 stores, and every store's got its sign over the sign of another store. And then there's the call of prayer at the distance, and I don't know who's playing music in a shop, and people are chatting. It's so lively and it's bustling, and the city just takes over all of your senses. And so if you're standing in the street, I remember I was standing in the street one time in Old Cairo in 2019. I was just looking at the street in Gamaliya, and I was thinking, it's so beautiful, but I wish I could just freeze it so I could take it in because everything around me is moving so quickly. And so that's one of also the reasons I really wanted to illustrate scenes from Cairo, is because I wanted to freeze a moment so that the audience can take it in. Because when you're in the moment, it's stunning, and there are so many layers, but you can't necessarily take it in. And the reason it's black and white is because with black and white, I can retain all the complexity with the details in my strokes. But then I'm simplifying because I'm only using black and white. It's either black or it's white. So it's a way to retain complexity while simplifying.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your grandmother's story and about this idea of looking into Cairo through the lens of your grandmother. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about the stories that your grandmother used to tell you about the city, and then how these came out in your illustrations would be nice. This layer of history, this layering of time that is very much present in your illustrations.
Okay, so for context, the Cairo Illustrated, the Stories from Heliopolis exhibit was set in Heliopolis, which is the neighborhood where my grandmother has lived her whole life and still lives today. My paternal grandmother, Salwa Hadaya. And the reason I picked the neighborhood is because I picked a neighborhood that my family was from, so that the stories I tell are stories that I'm familiar of, that stories from my family. Had I picked another neighborhood, I'd need to actually go there, and it would be someone else's story. So the reason I picked Heliopolis is because of that, and also because my grandmother is someone I'm very close to, and her stories, Cairo doesn't seem very daunting when I'm sitting in the living room of her apartment. And it doesn't seem daunting when I'm listening to her stories. And looking at a city through someone's eyes can be, I don't know, very eye-opening, especially a city as big as Cairo. And she has her small apartment, which is like a pocket of peace inside of the city, which is bustling and restless. I find peace when I'm sitting with her. So I guess maybe that's why I felt like I wanted to tell her story. She goes to this place called Chantilly in Korba. It's one of the neighborhoods in Heliopolis. Like not one of the areas in Heliopolis. One of the ones that was built like in the beginning of the 20th century, along with the neighborhood, was founded by a Belgian guy, Baron Opin. And in Mohammed, there's a restaurant there where she goes, and she's been going since she was a child. And the restaurant's been there since 1920, called Chantilly. And I go and I sit there with her, and she greets everybody there because she's known them forever. And everybody there's been going since they were children. And I don't know. I don't know why I wanted to tell her story, but I felt like it's important to tell. Because the heritage is not just, these heritage spaces are not just spaces and physical spaces, and they're not just valuable because they're old or because of their architectural design. They're also valuable because of the people that lived there and their stories. And these stories give these spaces additional value.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a gender approach into your project? And I'm thinking, that maybe there's something that we can call, I don't know, like a female gaze, or, your grandmother had a particular way of seeing Cairo because she's a woman. I don't know. This is just came up to my mind, and I thought, I'd like you to talk about this a bit more. Would your grandfather tell you another story that would make you illustrate Cairo in a different way?
Perhaps. My grandfather passed away in 2002, Allah yarhamu, so I didn't get the chance to hear his side of the story. And my other grandfather moved out of Heliopolis a long time ago. I sit and I talk to my grandmother for hours. And so the stories just came naturally. I suppose women sit and exchange stories. At least the women in my family sit and exchange stories significantly more often than the men.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why that's why we're able to gather these stories. And I never thought that my experience of Cairo was gendered really until Hannah brought it up when she was writing the article about my work.
Yeah.
I thought, well, yeah, it kind of is. But one of the people I interviewed for Cairo Illustrated Stories from Heliopolis said that up until recently, her experience of Cairo was from her balcony or from her car window, because she didn't always feel very safe walking in the streets.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't feel very safe walking in the streets until I realized it's fine. I just need to go and walk. And it's generally relatively safe. You just need to be mindful, just like you would in any big city. It's just this idea, خلي بالك, be careful. And maybe the sense of wonder that I have about certain things in Cairo, I would not have had I lived in Cairo as a man, and I would go in these streets every single day since I was a child, but that wasn't the case.
Yeah, this does not really come out in your illustrations, but what comes out is the noise, the hub, the happening, a lot is happening in the streets of Cairo in your illustrations. But this was great. Let's move on to your profession. So, asked about your profession. How do you explain it in layman terms?
So it depends on who I'm talking to.
Let's say the taxi driver. Let's say the taxi driver.
Or let's say the taxi driver. I would say I'm an illustrator وأنا برسم. تعملي إيه يعني? What do you do? So I'd say, when you pick up, let's say a juice box and there are illustrations of fruit, like drawings of fruit, and the fruit match the logo of the brand, and they would say yes. And I would tell them, that's what I do. I create illustration for people that need illustrations. They need to visually depict things. And they usually understand that because I'm taking an example from something they see in everyday life. If let's say it's one of my father's colleagues, and my father doesn't work in a creative profession, he's an engineer. I would explain it, and if they still don't really grasp what I do for a living, I'd say, do you know Google? When you type Google and you get an illustration, the Google Doodle, And they said, yes. I was like, the people who do that are illustrators. And I did one. And that usually clicks. They're like, oh,
Yeah,
so I pick a project that would be recognizable. And then they've seen it or they've seen something similar. And so they connect the dots.
easy, simple, clear. Thank you. Besides the project, the Illustrated Cairo project, what is a project that you are most proud of?
I really enjoyed working with the Mobius Design Studio team on an illustrated map for an exhibit in Basel, Switzerland, entitled Evaporating Suns.
أكيد, yeah. You're going to enjoy working on maps. I mean, looking at your illustrations. Yeah, so maybe we can talk about the difference between illustrating maps and illustrating a city.
So I really enjoyed illustrating it. First of all, when I was 8 years old, I had an atlas of the world that I used to carry around with me. And I used to love looking at the maps and the stats and the cities and the countries and the borders. I really enjoyed that. So I just generally love maps. And also a lot of commercial projects come with very tight deadlines and no time for research, unfortunately. But with Mobius, they gave me the time to research. Not only that, they appreciated the research and we went through it together. And that was wonderful. Sometimes you need to cut the research short because the client doesn't have time or you need to just deliver the information very quickly. But for this project, I got to do the full process to my heart's content. And it was wonderful. And I kind of had the creative freedom of creating the map, but also I wanted to match the aesthetic and the visual identity of the book where the map was going to be printed. So there was a bit of that too, which was interesting.
Tab, what is the project you felt got you the most recognition for?
Let me tell you, but before I get to that, the map for context was about contemporary myths in the Gulf. So I illustrated a map of the Gulf because I realized I did not specify that. Anyway, moving on to the next question. A project I got a lot of recognition for. The Google Doodle I did of Mohammed al-Faytouri, the Sudanese Libyan poet and playwright, was definitely one of the projects that I got quite a bit of recognition for. I also really enjoyed the process. The team was really, really good to work with. There's a lot of back and forth, always very constructive feedback. So the result was quite nice. It was very exciting to load Google on that day in November 2021 and see an illustration that I'd worked on for such an incredible literary figure.
Oh, definitely.
Well, that's definitely a project I got quite a bit of recognition for. And last summer I worked on an album cover for Wigs, which was cool, the Egyptian rapper.
Yeah. About the use of Arabic typography in your illustrations, how do you deal with this? I don't know, tell us a bit more about, maybe a favorite typeface that you have, a certain script that you favor.
That's a very good question. Never thought of that. I always found Arabic type very daunting when I was a student. I guess because there wasn't a course offered for Arabic type. There is now at AUS, thanks to Hala and Reem from Mobius. But there wasn't when I was a student. And I always avoided it because I didn't know how to use it. And then now I have a different relationship with it. I really love the work of Khajag and Waba'il Mor'os and Pascal Zoghbi taught us in university, and his typefaces are fantastic as well. And suddenly we went from using just standard fonts to having this variety of different typefaces that we can use. When it comes specifically to my work, I rely on fonts and typefaces that I see around me. So sort of documentation from the streets in Cairo. And I take pictures of sign, and then I try to match a little bit and do a little bit of lettering.
No, I mean, you could also tell me that you sometimes use your own handwriting.
I do use my own handwriting sometimes. So I did an animation based on a song that I really like by Dunya Wa'il and Al-Waili called Bikya. The song goes, Qalbi ba'a khurda nadinu bikya, bikya, bikya. And so when I did the lyrics, I did them handwritten. And I thought it's kind of like when they spray paint words onto the wall, Mudarris Arabi, and then a very random phone number. And I tried to match that kind of looseness. Of course, also when I'm lettering, I started lettering a little bit in my work. not quite there yet, but I'm trying to improve. I kind of like mixing Nesr and Kufi a little bit. Kufi is, I really enjoyed the graphic design symposium that was held recently because of that, because it's
Which
just a reminder of the graphic design symposium that I attended, the one that you held at the end of February.
Oh, yes.
The title
escapes me. I was wondering. I know. Yeah. Sure. The online one, the one that we've.
The one about the history of graphic design. Yes. That was very eye-opening as well. And it encouraged me to use more lettering in my work, because just the idea of like, why are we so scared of the script?
Yeah.
This idea comes from the West, that our script is difficult and that our script is complex. And of course it has its complexity, which makes it so rich, but that shouldn't keep us from trying to implement it into our work more.
Oh, so much to speak about here. Maybe another symposium or another, let's see what we can do with this. But let's go back to your work. So this is really interesting, the way, you're combining Kufi and Naskhi and coming up with all the inspiration, the inspiring typographers who you've learned from. So why do you feel that what you do is important or of great relevance?
I didn't necessarily feel it was of importance or great relevance until, I guess, when I put together my first and second exhibit, and visitors and attendees came and said, oh, I recognize this in my own hometown in India or in Pakistan or in Syria. And our cities are also suffering in that way, where the integrity of neighborhoods is being damaged and destroyed by infrastructural projects. Or someone would tell me, oh, I hadn't noticed this neighborhood before. I hadn't noticed this building before until you illustrated it. Or someone would send me a selfie with one of the buildings I illustrated in Cairo. And they're like, yeah, I see it. I noticed how interesting it is that this building's right next to this much older building. And then I realized, okay, maybe my work is relevant because of that. It's allowing people to look at the environment around them a little bit differently. And to feed into this culture of understanding that we're having towards our culture that's growing recently at the moment in the region, a culture of understanding as opposed to casting judgments.
Yeah.
And
having said that,
and shying away from our own culture.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking, I don't think it should stop here. I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that you have a plan to draw other cities around the, Arab countries. I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Do you see yourself drawing?
I do hope so.
Yeah.
I do hope so. I have friends who've been to Amman and Jordan, and it's so beautiful. It reminds me of Cairo, except it's on a hill. So it's more of the city unfolds in a different way as opposed to Cairo, which is more flat.
Yeah.
And so I've always wanted to draw Amman. I've always wanted to go to Beirut. Baghdad's also a city I find very interesting. I kind of want to draw something from here, from Dubai, but in a different way, because the way Dubai is always depicted is these drone images and these shiny renders. And I'm pretty sure there might be a more interesting way in depicting the city from the view, from the eyes of someone who's actually in the street, as opposed to floating in the clouds. So these are things I have in mind, and I'm currently working on my next exhibit. It is still Cairo Illustrated, Stories from Beit Ramses, which is an old house in Cairo. Nice. So I'm working on that in collaboration with the Egyptian Heritage Rescue Foundation and the British Council in Egypt.
Oh, great. Looking forward to this project. Tab, any final word that you would like to leave us with today with this?
2 things, perhaps. The first thing is, if you're looking to start illustrating, just pick up a pen, a piece of paper, pick out a reference, set a timer for 1 minute and just draw the reference. And then when the timer finishes, pick out another reference and start again. And
with
get
eyes
rid of the fear of drawing.
Eyes open.
Not even eyes closed. Eyes open, but you're drawing with a pen, so you're not allowed to erase. And you're not allowed to revisit the sketches. You just draw and draw and draw until you get rid of the fear of wanting to do something good. And you just focus on getting better. And that kind of gives, as an illustrator, gives you the confidence to create more freely and more frequently, instead of being too much in your head about whether or not the work is good. And the second thing is, take your phone or your camera or your phone if you're in Cairo, because they tend to bother you sometimes if they see you with the camera and they take it away. Oh, out of privacy, people get really nervous about cameras for some reason. And then just look around, observe, and take hundreds and hundreds of pictures. And just walk in the streets of your city.
Walk like a flaneur without even thinking where you're going. Just get lost in the city.
Yeah.
And
you never know what you might notice.
Yeah, and if you can't, look at Nora Zeid's illustrations and get lost within the illustration there. Thank you so much.
Oh, there are so many other illustrators. We're all doing the best we can.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you so much. There's so much to talk about. So I hope we're going to have another podcast with you on another day. But for now, thank you so much for this inspiring conversation, Nora. Have a good day.
I'd be honored, and thank you, Yasmine. This was lovely.